What's up? I'm Julian, and I play in a band from Canada called Inhalants. And for the last 2 years, I've been designing this crazy instrument powered by a Game Boy from the 90s. Anyway, today we're talking about how this monstrosity actually works, because I don't think you guys understand how fucking cool this thing is going to be. So here is the block diagram that shows all the connections. I'm not going to explain this diagram to you because it's total chaos and has more than a couple hundred connections that I have to wire by hand. Instead, I'm going to explain the path that each signal goes through. This is going to be a lot of info, so buckle up, nerds. So the Game Boy has 3 outputs, left and right analog audio, and then the link cable, which can send like limited digital data. The Game Boy is modified to bypass the noisy internal headphone amplifier, which gives me a cleaner like line level signal straight from the sound chip. Even though the audio is technically stereo because it's left and right, I actually treat them as 2 mono outputs and then just pan my instruments to one side or the other in LSDJ. And that means that I can treat it as 2 separate instruments. So channel 1, which is usually the right channel on the Game Boy, is used for all the synth leads that play through the PA and don't go through my bass amp. It's the main channel that I use for all of the synth stuff. The first thing it passes through is this cheap little Donner noise gate in the Game Boy module. There's one noise gate here for each channel to make sure that the Game Boy is totally silent when nothing's coming through, because it has a little bit of electronic noise when not playing anything. So after the noise gate, channel 1 goes from the Game Boy module to the patch bay, where it's patched to one of the inputs on the Chaos Pad effects processor. The Chaos Pad is actually a really powerful device. It has a bunch of different effects on it to give me a little more depth to the Game Boy's sounds. It also has a few of its own preset synth sounds that you can control through MIDI. It's especially unique as a live tool because it has this touchpad on it that lets you adjust the parameters in a really interesting and interactive way. Rather than just turning knobs, I get to finger it like a big square. After channel 1 has passed through the Chaos Pad, it's patched to channel 1 on this little Mackie mixer, which has been taken apart and incorporated into this patch bay in my 3D model. The mixer is really simple. It has a basic low and high shelf EQ that I can adjust for different rooms, but mostly it's there to cleanly amplify the signal from the Game Boy, and it also turns the output from an unbalanced signal to a balanced one. And then it passes through an isolator, which is just a transformer to avoid ground loops. From there, it goes to an output on the back of the device, and then it goes to the mixer at the front of the house at the venue. So that's where the engineer plugs into this device. Okay, and just a quick refresher on unbalanced versus balanced audio signals. Unbalanced is what comes out of your guitar or anything with an RCA jack. It's fine for most applications, but it's prone to noise over longer cable runs. A balanced signal is what comes out of anything that uses an XLR cable, like a microphone. With a balanced cable, you can do a much longer cable run without picking up extra noise, just because of the special noise canceling that comes from using the third wire. So sometimes the Game Boy actually takes over bass duty for me, and I'm able to put my guitar down and just focus on vocals. So all of the bass programming is done on channel 2 from the Game Boy. It goes through its own noise gate, just like channel 1, and then it goes straight to the mixer instead of through the effects processor like channel 1 did. Here, the mixer serves the same basic purpose as it did with channel 1. It lets me pan it to the opposite side of channel 1 so I can treat them as 2 mono outputs. And it also gives me the same basic EQ. And then from the mixer, it goes to this special MIDI-controlled A-B switcher. But before I talk about that, I need to stop here and we have to introduce my actual bass guitar. This is my 1991 Charvel Fusion 4, and it's the only bass I like. I have 2 of them in case one breaks because they don't make them anymore, and I use a few pedals with it before it goes to my amp. Because of that, I would like to have the option to use those pedals on the channel 2 signal from the Game Boy as well, so that I can make the sounds fairly similar. So I haven't modeled it yet, but I'll also be building a special pedal board with this whole project. I'm going to call the pedal board, and then the main console, like the LaMeBoy thing, is just going to be called the mothership. Just so you guys know how to differentiate between the two. And it's important to understand the way that the bass is integrated, because there's 3 sources of sound, right? I have 2 coming from the Game Boy, and then I have 1 coming from my bass guitar. So the bass goes into the pedal board, through a noise gate, and then into a SansAmp bass driver, which gives me a really nasty overdrive, and then also turns it into a balanced signal, like I said before. The bass signal then goes to the mothership via a custom multi-pin cable that handles all of the back and forth connections between the mothership and the pedal board. And once it hits the mothership, it actually goes backwards through the output of a passive DI box. What that does is it takes the balanced signal from the SansAmp and then unbalances it, and then it goes into the other input on the AB switcher from earlier. This AB switcher is awesome. In the actual LSDJ song programming, I can dictate the changes between the bass guitar and the channel 2 signal from the Game Boy without having to touch anything. I don't have to use any pedals or anything. Now, you might be asking, why don't I just send the channel 2 signal through the PA on channel 1 instead of faffing about with all this switching? But that doesn't quite work for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we play a lot of basements and DIY spaces, not always by choice. Basically, none of those places have a big subwoofer for their PA. And secondly, and more importantly, my bass amp has a tube preamp. The reason I do that is that the tubes have an interesting smoothing effect on the very sharp square waves that come out of the Game Boy. So when I'm designing bass sounds on the Game Boy, I actually do it while it's plugged into my bass amp, because the sound of it passing through the tubes is what makes it fit properly into the mix and sufficiently replace a bass guitar. It's pretty interesting. People don't really believe me a lot of the time when I tell them that the bass sound is a synth, but the low frequencies that come out of the Game Boy are actually pretty sick. So the reason these both go through the AB switcher is that then I can send whichever signal I want through the rest of my pedals, and I can use my pedals on both the bass guitar and the channel 2 signal from the Game Boy. Because after the AB switch, the signal goes through my pedal board, through the pedals, and then back to the mothership again, where it finally goes into the bass amp. Are you guys keeping up so far? Do you see why this took me so many months to design? Pay attention, because it actually gets even more elaborate. Remember, the third output from the Game Boy is a data line that can communicate some simple digital data from the Game Boy. We're not going to use this to turn 1 spoon into 2 spoons. Instead, the link cable connects to a special custom Arduino called the Arduino Boy. The Arduino Boy is a tiny microcomputer that interprets the data from LSDJ and then translates it into MIDI data that can be understood by standard MIDI devices. And there's quite a few of those in the LaMeBoy. The Arduino Boy goes through the third output on the Game Boy module and patches into a MIDI splitting device that breaks the single MIDI signal into 4 separate ones. One of these goes to the AB switcher, like I mentioned earlier. One goes to the Chaos pad to adjust effects and switch patches, and one goes to the rear outputs on the device so that I can control outboard devices like a light rig or whatever else I might want to control in sync with our music. One is unassigned for expansion, and then the USB MIDI connection on the Arduino Boy goes to a little micro PC that's going inside this whole thing. Which brings me to the last module that I really need to discuss. I'm actually going to be putting a little Windows PC in here. It's an old Lenovo device, and it serves a couple purposes. It's going to connect to all the USB devices so that I can push firmware or load samples to the various Arduinos and the Chaos pad. It'll probably handle the click track for our drummer as well. And it's going to manage our visuals. So that is what this little TV up here on the left is for. I'll go into that in the next episode, but we're going to design an environment to make it easy for people to contribute images or animations or visuals programs, and then we'll have those projected on us live. We don't have that environment ready yet, but that's the intended purpose for this little TV up on the side. And that's essentially it for this crazy thing that I've been building for the last few years. I could go into way more detail, but I think I'll do that on request or as I actually go through the build process. But I think this is a sufficient summary of this whole thing. Let me know what questions you guys have about anything, or if you notice any issues with the way I have this thing wired. I'm so deep into this project at this point that I've forgotten why I've come to a lot of the decisions, and I just have to trust that my judgment made sense at the time. and I have to hope that I've been sufficiently rigorous the whole time. I think I have, though, because I keep coming up against what I think are like new problems or things I didn't think about, but then I realized that I already solved the problem months ago, which is a nice experience. The most exciting part, though, is that after this episode, I can stop going over the design crap and we can actually start building. There's nothing really as exciting as having an idea turn into a real object. So next episode, I'm going to get a prototype cut so I can test fit all of the paneling, and then I can see if all of the electronics works. All right. I think I'm pretty well done. I'm starting to sweat. So good luck on anything you're doing this week. I hope you accomplish something significant. Also, listen to Inhalants and get fucked and come to Skatopia on June 24th and 25th. I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember, science rules.